Hello there, and welcome, Virtual Space Hero community, to yet another live conversation around hybrid learning today. So, in the past weeks, we have been continuously exploring hybrid teamwork, hybrid collaboration, and we talked a lot as well about hybrid meetings. Just the other week, we had one of our US colleagues here, Elise Keith, talking about hybrid meetings and in presence meetings and when it's really best to meet in person. Today, I'm excited because throughout the conversations that we are having on LinkedIn and also with our clients and throughout the projects that we are doing with our team, we do see that particularly when it comes to learning and the hybrid component, there are still a lot of questions to be answered. And I'm excited that today I have one of the leading experts with us here on the Virtual Space Hero LinkedIn stage, connecting also from quite far away than where we are connecting from. And with this, I'm already welcoming on our stage Diana Howles from Howles and Associates. Hi, Diana.
Hi, Barbara. Great to be here.
Great that we had chance to find a slot in our both calendars where it works. Thanks a lot for taking the time. Diana, let us know where you're connecting from today.
I am connecting today from North Central US, but good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone wherever you are in the world.
Absolutely. That's the beauty of the global outreach of our streaming as well, that we can really count with an audience from across the globe. And particularly for today's conversation, I got a few questions already beforehand, Diana, that I integrated into our conversation flow of people who were not able to join us live, but they wanted to make sure that we pick up on their questions. So be prepared. We're going to have a really intense 28 minutes, half an hour now together to talk about a topic that is like really occupying many of us, hybrid training, or as you call it, successful life mixed learning. But before we dive into the topic, I'd love to know, Diana, you are in the learning field for quite some time. How did you get into the field? And particularly, since when have you been working on virtual and hybrid topics?
Yes, well, I started in corporate training. I was always attracted to learning, loved learning, grew up in a household where my parents taught us that value. And so I got into corporate training because I enjoyed working with people. I also enjoyed learning. And so it was kind of a natural fit for me. But back in 2000, so over 20 years ago, I had a manager who said, "Hey, we have some new technology." Back then, we called it web conferencing. And he said, "I'd like you to learn this technology and see if we can use it with our customers, with our internal staff, with our organization." And so I started to learn some of these platforms, some of which aren't even around anymore. And they were the early predecessors of what we now call virtual training platforms or video conferencing platforms. So it's been really fun to see it evolve over the years. I've always been attracted to this technology, I think, because of the novelty of it, the challenge of it, and the exciting affordances, right, that it provides for us. So I've been doing virtual training for over 2 decades now, and just really love that working in that space as you do with the virtual heroes.
Yeah, absolutely. What is your favorite aspect of virtual learning or virtual learning design, if you think about it?
Yeah, I think, for any trainer, when you have those aha moments with your learners, or when you can actually take something that's very challenging, I like working through challenges. So being able to teach something very challenging and then successfully see their application in the workplace, see them grow in that area, and you see the success and the impact of that learning, I think that's where we really feel very rewarded with our training and learning solutions.
Oh, fantastic. Absolutely. And so we already have Ivan, Antonio. Thanks a lot. Barbara and Diana, thanks for this webinar. Great topic, hybrid learning. So it's hybrid learning, or as you call it, Diana, life mixed learning. What's about the terminology change here?
Yeah, hybrid is such a common term. It's used for all sorts of things. We see it being used for hybrid workplaces, the combination of workers on site or being remote. We see hybrid cars where you have electricity and fuel together. We see hybrid systems where air conditioning and furnace provisions are provided in the same system. So it's just an overused term. So it seemed to me that there needed to be a fresh term that helps us clearly understand what it is we're talking about. So my definition of this for live mixed learning, or as some would say, hybrid learning, is the live mix of online and on-site participants and facilitators in a concurrent shared learning space. So it is synchronous. It is a mix of these two venues. And then we have this challenge, right, of how do we do this well when we have participants in multiple venues like this?
Do you think that there is some confusion as well, as you mentioned in one of the articles that I read from you about blended and hybrid learning?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So some people do refer to live mixed or hybrid as blended. Usually in the learning corporate space, we define blended learning, right, as the combination of both synchronous and asynchronous learning activities. And we blend those two together. And the
Mhm.
research is very clear, right, that that is very successful, very impactful to learning, to have that spaced repetition built into a program like that, where you do have these live successive sessions and then asynchronous activities and independent work, all of that repetition, really good for learning. So, there's so many terms floating out there. Some folks have called it here or there instruction, which is really clever, or concurrent classroom is another one. Synchronous, live, blended, there's just so many terms. So I just thought we just needed a clear, fresh term. It is exactly that. It's live and it's mixed.
Absolutely. And to all of you out there, Diana has a web page on which the blog is also located, where you can find a lot of amazing content about virtual and hybrid training. So you definitely need to check that out, but also connect with Diana on LinkedIn. If you search through this conversation, you find her as a speaker, and you definitely should connect with her as soon as possible. Also, because Diana's new book is on the market already, Next Level Virtual Training. And in this book, you can also find a chapter and content dedicated to hybrid training or live mixed training as well. So check this out. Now, if we go back, Diana, we talk about live mixed learning, hybrid training. If you think about your path into virtual and then hybrid training, if you look at your business and your activities, how much of the training that you're conducting is hybrid or live mixed?
Yeah, I'm seeing the hybrid grow. So I'm doing more live mixed when the situation calls out for it. Still, I would say I'm doing more virtual, exclusively virtual, and
Mhm.
hardly any in person. I think when we look at the larger scope all over the world, right, we see the hybrid workplaces, because we do have workers who are remote and also on site. We also see more global work where we're interconnecting all over the world. For these reasons, it creates a necessity, right, to offer learning solutions that can accommodate both workers that are online or on site on a given day. So you see that necessity there. But I would definitely say right now I'm teaching more exclusively all virtual.
That's interesting. It's also the experience that we are making or that I'm making at
Me
Virtual Space.
too.
Now, I'm wondering, do you think, because if I look at my clients,
Mhm.
some of them would just benefit also from having it as a live mixed setting.
Mm.
What do you think are the reasons that hybrid training, live mixed training, is still developing rather slowly? That is my experience, at least.
Yes, it's a great question. And I'm sure our listeners too have responses to that as well. As we all know, live mixed learning so much more complex, so many more complexities, harder to do, takes more time, takes more resources. So, I would say even a couple years ago, I heard colleagues, and perhaps you did too, Barbara, say never do at that time hybrid training. I've never seen it work well. I've actually heard people say that. I'm here to tell you and our listeners that it can be done smoothly, it can be done successfully and effectively, but it does take a lot of work and setup. So, because we have this sort of obstacle. I think what people need to know and understand is if you have a situation where everyone, all your participants are virtual, go ahead and deliver that learning solution virtually. If you have a situation where everyone can be together and in person, deliver that in person. But in those rare situations where you do have the difference of workers either there in the room or online, it makes sense, right, to then invest that extra time, that extra setup, those extra resources to deliver a successful hybrid event. So that would be my recommendation to learners.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yes, indeed. Also, I think even 1.5 year ago, I was still like sort of one of the people saying like, well, if you can try to avoid hybrid,
Yeah.
just because I saw in so many organizations that particularly the tech side was
Mm.
not ready. And we do know that if the tech side is not working, it's like really a bad experience. And I wanted to avoid that hybrid gets a bad reputation, right? Because that's the
Yeah,
problem at the end. What we are facing
absolutely.
also with virtual now, at least in my experience, that so many educators were thrown into virtual without upskilling, without support, that today, in particular in higher education, many of the students, the universities I'm working with, students
Mhm.
don't want the virtual classes anymore. But
Mm.
because I think they were just done badly.
Yes, absolutely. It colors our experience, right? And you mentioned, higher education and academia has been a leader in this space of live mixed. They've been doing it for years. So the corporate world now, coming out of the pandemic, has seen that it's a necessity because now we do have these hybrid workplaces. So, but that's why we're here, Barbara, right? To talk about how do we do it well, and it can be done well.
Absolutely. So if we just jump into life mixed, what do we need to consider before, during, and after? What are the most important aspects, Diana, that you would like us to look at when we agree to run a hybrid training or workshop?
It's a great question. So let's start with before. So we know kind of the no brainer here, right? Is that technical setup well before class day, making sure that you check out all of your equipment, do a run through, sometimes even have technical support there because you have so many more things that you're working with, cameras and microphones and class setup, and all of that is really important. The other thing that I like to do, Barbara, and maybe our listeners do this as well, is when I teach live mixed, we offer what I call participant venue choice. In other words, we allow the learner to communicate with us, how will you show up? They choose their venue. I will be there online. I will be there on site. And we can do this through the learning management system, or if it's a smaller and they register for the venue, or if it's a smaller class, sometimes they'll just let us know through an email vote. But what this does is it creates autonomy, and then I
Mm,
learned through experience that we say if you register to be online, then you commit to that. Because sometimes we'd have learners who would register in person and then show up online, right? So we say, okay, you choose, but then you commit to it. So I would say that's part of the before piece. The during piece, really important to set up those ground rules. Everyone knows that, right? With virtual training too, set up what I call netiquette, the etiquette that we agree to follow on the internet. And it includes things like if you bring your laptop to class, in person participants, mute your audio, mute your speakers so we don't have that audio feedback that disrupts the classroom flow. It can also include things like in room participants avoid side conversations, and we let adult learners know why. We want everyone to hear what all of us have to say. We don't want the virtual learners to feel alienated. So those are important too. And then, of course, you asked Barbara after. After, I would say after every session, have some quiet reflection. You, as a facilitator, the last hybrid or live mixed learning session that I did just recently, I took some time and I wrote 5 pages worth of just reflection on what went well and what could I do differently. I noticed that, when you're looking at your in-person class, you have the camera right there too. And so to remember to make eye contact with the camera, for us, it's mounted on the wall. So that gives the illusion, right, of eye contact with your virtual participants. So that's something that I wanted to improve, is to keep, every learner that's there, whether they're online or on site, they are part of that class. And we work really hard to make sure everyone is included. So good reflection is helpful at the
Mm.
end of your live mixed learning.
Absolutely. And I just love that, Diana, because I was like surprising you with a new setup, right? And you immediately adjusted
Oh yeah, I know.
the camera here, talking
Right?
about camera positioning.
Exactly. Camera awareness is what I like to call it. Yeah.
Camera awareness. Absolutely. Very good. Very good. So if you think about co-facilitation, because me personally, I have never done a live mix training without a co-facilitator, but I
Yeah.
do know from colleagues that mainly due to economic restrictions, so
Hmm.
most of the times it's a budgetary decision that HR does not want to pay for a second trainer, second facilitator. So very often, what my experience is that on site there is somebody from HR or a technical assistant supporting the on-site participants, that everything is working, while the main trainer, the main facilitator, is online. That is, at least in the cases that I know of from my colleagues, that is what in most of the times was happening. As I said, for me, never. But when you think about the co-facilitation process and live mix training, what would you say is an important pillar here in terms of coordination, design, or even collaboration between the facilitators?
Yes, well said. One of my pillars is definitely using co-facilitator and IT support partnerships. So
Mm,
I always recommend you also have a co-facilitator. When you think about it, because of the multiplied complexities of delivering a live mixed learning solution, there's so much you're thinking about with managing the virtual participants in room, the surprises that inevitably happen that we know are part of the training, right? There's so much going on. It's easy to get overloaded, cognitive overload for the facilitator. So when
mm,
you partner with a co-facilitator, they're online or they're on site. Both of you are co-facilitators, but one of you is lead. And that lead facilitator then can be either venue, right? But what I've noticed is the virtual attendees feel like they have somebody anchored in their venue, and the same for in person. So it kind of helps equalize it, but it also helps when you are overwhelmed. What do? You hire more hands. And then you mentioned too this idea of the IT partnerships. I always partner with our IT. They're either on call during the class. Sometimes they're in the room. Sometimes they help us with setup beforehand. So really building those partnerships if you can. If you don't have those resources, see if you can be creative with that. Even for co-facilitation, Barbara, you mentioned some people don't have the resources to work with a co-facilitator. So in a class that I recently did, I asked one of the lead participants, who I know is pretty sharp, to help me on the online site, and I was in room. And then we also asked another participant if she would kind of be our eyes and ears and watch the chat for us, because we had our hands full, and she did an excellent job. If we missed something in chat, she would call our attention to it. So remember, you can leverage leaders in your participant group to help with some of those roles too, if you don't have a co-facilitator resource for a particular solution.
And Diana, I love that. It reminds me a little bit of a conversation I had with Cassie Labori, where she was
Oh,
saying we were holding the bar for our learners sometimes too low. And what you're saying is also like encouraging them being part of the whole
yeah.
learning, and also taking responsibility to some extent for the learning experience themselves.
That's right. And there's more invested ownership too, right? And then they feel good about helping be part of a successful solution. So, yeah, creative resourcing, just really being open to what some solutions are. There's usually multiple solutions to any problem. We just have to be able to see them.
Creative resourcing. I like that. Like that. Um, if you were to choose, and let's say you are taking over a life mix training, but you know that you're going to be only you as a main facilitator, maybe you have some tech help, but that's it. Would you rather choose, what do you feel more comfortable, just to get a little bit your personal handling of this? Would you rather choose to be online or on site?
Mm. Traditionally, when I've worked with a co-facilitator quite a bit to deliver live mixed, I have usually been on site and she has usually been online, and that works really well for us. So that's what I've done. But I've also taught where I've been online and all my participants were in a room together on site. So, the live mix definition is, as I mentioned before, the live mix of online and on site participants and facilitators in this concurrent shared learning space. You can also have hubs, right, in different countries around the world, different provinces around the world. There could be hubs of people on site. And then you could also have virtual attendees. Like, all of that still falls under our umbrella here of live mixed learning. So there's a lot of combinations.
Absolutely. I was wondering if you think that, because we have when you talk about hybrid training or live mixed training, I remember with Robert Kinsley also when we talked about it, or at
Oh, yeah.
least Keith, that very often we do if we're on site, we tend or sometimes facilitators or participants tend to forget about the onlines. So I
Mhm.
was wondering whether it could be more product it could be better for a training if I'm the only facilitator, that I'm online in order to give the online aspect more importance, to say so, or more weight, or at
Yeah.
least, even though we are experienced facilitators, but maybe I was thinking that this could be an idea to leverage a little bit the disadvantages that often
Yeah.
come together with the online part.
Yeah, I love that thinking, because we know the virtual participants are often the ones who we are working so they don't feel like second class citizens, right? And
Mm.
so, even adopting like a virtual first policy. I remember sitting in a hybrid meeting where they did an icebreaker around the room. And at the time, it was a Polycom phone. Some people were just calling in from the phone, but because they didn't have a visual footprint, they were forgotten and excluded from that icebreaker. And ever since that meeting, I have made an attempt to always have this sort of virtual first policy. If I ask a question, I say, let's hear from somebody online. And then I go to somebody in room. How about one of you in room? And back and forth, but leaning more toward that area. But I do like your thinking about perhaps being facilitating online. But what I've noticed, Barbara, and maybe listeners have noticed this too, it tends to be we lean more toward where the majority of people are. So I taught a live mix class where I had one person in room with me, and the majority of folks were online. And I noticed it skewed to the online participants, right? But if the majority are in room, so it's really interesting, that dynamic. But what we work very hard at doing as a facilitator, and ideally in partnership with your co-facilitator, is bring everybody in. And that includes warming them up, right? So I make
Mm.
sure my virtual participants, I invite them to come early, 10 minutes early. They usually don't. But if they get there by 5 minutes early, we start talking with them. Because once they start talking, they're more likely to do it again. You get them over that inertia, right? And once they chat, they're more likely to chat again. Once they contribute to the whiteboard, they're more likely to do it again. So we really warm up those virtual folks. We encourage them, we affirm them. We do the same for in room. And so hopefully you have a very robust kind of conversation and discussion with everybody.
I like that a lot. It reminds me a lot like of a democracy principle, right? If I
Yeah.
have three-fourth online and one-fourth on site, maybe to challenge those online more often, or give them three-fourth of possibilities whilst only one-fourth for those online on site, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thinking about this sort of maybe not always it must be remote first,
Right.
but great, Diana.
Good point. And I taught a class 2 weeks ago where we had 10 people in room and about 9 people online, and just really working at trying to keep it, equitable discussion. So I would say, oh, let's hear from somebody online, and then somebody in room would speak. And then they say, oh, great comment, that's really interesting, let's hear from somebody online. So you just prompt again, but you're always affirming and encouraging, right, to continue. What you reward gets repeated.
Absolutely. Great points. When you think now about learning design, I would love to hear your opinion about what would you particularly advise workshop facilitators, learning experience designers to think about how the life mixed or hybrid component should be reflected in the learning design. Is there anything particular that is different to virtual or in presence?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. So the pillar here would be equitable learning activities. So we just think very thoughtfully when we're doing design, right, for these learning experiences about, I want to make sure that everybody, regardless of how they choose to show up, has an equitable access to whatever we're doing. So if we are debriefing on a whiteboard, and you have to think this through ahead of time, right? So that means that our remote participants have access, of course, through their platform, but my in-room participants would need to bring their laptops or devices, and they need to know that ahead of time. So well before class day, right, we're communicating to them, bring your laptops, make sure you mute your audio so we don't have that feedback. Be camera ready. We let everybody know ahead of time. So then everybody in room 2 can participate on that whiteboard using the platform. Now remember, I let participants choose and commit to how they will show up. Usually the people who choose in room want to have that in-person experience also. So I allow them to leverage that because that's what they want. So I'll say, raise your physical hand or raise your virtual hand. I don't say they have to use the physical or the virtual hand in the platform because they chose in room, right? They want to be there in room. But still, you're giving them options so that they can participate. And then if they have a comment, they can just raise their hands and speak out loud. Sometimes, as you know, some of our more introverted participants can be very vocal on chat. So we leverage chat as well. But in-room folks can also speak up. The on-site folks and the online folks can speak up. And sometimes if my classes are pretty small, manageable, 9 online, 10 in room, I even say, please remain unmuted. And if you are in a noisy environment, go ahead and mute and then come off when you speak. But the reason I ask them to be unmuted is because muting can kill conversational flow, right? I have to unmute and then it's just more effort. So if we keep them unmuted, it just encourages more discussion, and that's what we want. We want that participation and engagement.
I like that idea a lot. I think I read it once in Priya Parker's one of her newsletters that she was also promoting the idea of unmuting like 2, 3 years ago. And I was also trying it out, but I need to be very honest. I think in most of my trainings, I still keep the mute and rather a very disciplined approach to speaking up with hand raised
Yes.
or when we're in a conversation, because it usually does not super properly work out. Maybe it's also a facilitator thing that I need to be more precise in my instructions. But I tried it out and I think I still feel more comfortable, but that might be also a cultural bias, right? So I'm Austrian. I like if somebody speaks, then somebody else speaks, if the conversation is rather structured and very, very sort of structured and disciplined.
Right? Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so it has to be a quiet environment. So we say you remain unmuted as long as you're in a quiet space. And again, all of that instruction, as you know, repetition, repetition, repetition. We have to say it more than once. I always say 3 times, 3 ways. And then people come prepared, and there are always exceptions. But yes, good point.
A few last questions. So we are already approaching like the half-hour conversation flow here, but I still want to know if you think about life mixed training or hybrid learning. One of the findings that was always a super big surprise for me from the book from Karen Reed and Joe Allen about it's the Suddenly Hybrid book and hybrid training. What they found out in their data set is that hybrid meetings can be perceived as more productive than in presence or virtual meetings if they are conducted well. To be
Mm.
fair, it's a quantitative data analysis, so I don't really know, I don't really remember if they had a good explanation why that is the case. But do you have the feeling out of your experience that a hybrid life mixed training experience can be more productive or a better experience than even just a virtual one or an in-presence one?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting thing. There's when you're all in the same space, it's easy to habituate sooner, meaning, there's less, the more exposed you are to a stimulus, the less attention you pay to it. So, in this environment where there are different novelties at play, right, there's always something going on. I can see how maybe that would help people to do less multitasking. The research does show that
Mhm.
people do less of that when they are on camera. And I do encourage people to have a visual footprint, our participants, and to have those dual cameras as well. So important for us to be able to see our online participants, and online participants, I think, have to be
Mm.
able to see the in-room because they will tell you, I feel like I'm there. So that dual camera access is another pillar that I recommend. But yeah, I can see how the hybrid meeting, it also allows you again to show up how you choose, and because of those different interactive elements, it might create more diversity in terms of, oh, we need to pay attention to that, and less, right, tuning out and disengaging.
And you're already talking about interaction, and this is really one of the questions that I've been discussing with so many other facilitators already. When it comes to live mixed or hybrid training, what are the strategies on, or what are the questions that you ask yourself to decide on how to set up the small group activities, the breakout rooms? So whether it's virtual only breakout rooms and in presence only breakout rooms, or whether you mix them up, what are your criteria here to decide on this question?
Excellent question. So, short answer, it can be done either way. What I like to do, and what has worked well for me, so I continue to do it, is my in room participants, I do in room breakouts. And my virtual participants, I do virtual breakouts. So, usually I'll have, let's say, virtual breakouts 1 through 3 online. And then I'll break up the in room participants, your group 4 and your group 5. And because remember, I allow my participants to choose their venue. Those folks who chose to be in person, they want kind of that in-person dynamic feel, right? And so we're giving that to them. But then when I debrief, we debrief everybody, right? We bring everybody back. I'll do the 2-minute warning for my online participants through a broadcast message, and I'll let the in-room folks know, okay, 2 minutes before we wrap up, and bring everybody back to the main hub. However, that being said, I do have colleagues, Barbara, and maybe our listeners have done this too, who very successfully do mix the online and the on-site together in breakouts. But the caveat is you need to make sure that you can support that well with a big room, because you want people to move to different aspects of the room, because otherwise you have lots of chatter and you can be talking over each other. And I have colleagues who also, again, you let them know before class day, bring your headsets. And then when you are working in the combined virtual and on-site breakouts, you're wearing headsets again to minimize that noise that can be disruptive in the room. So a lot of ways to work it, but super important to come back together. And let's hear from online breakout group 1, and let's hear from in-room, breakout 2, and everybody is debriefing, but it does work well.
And I like that idea a lot that you were saying, that you mentioned it quite a few times now. You let participants choose how they connect, whether it's online or on-site. And I just recall one of the workshops that I was co-facilitating, a hybrid one, a live mixed one, where, but I can't remember exactly because I was the virtual trainer. We were using Miro as a platform.
Yeah.
And we also wanted to give our participants on-site the possibility to work on their flip charts with the cards and with with the sticky notes without having to access the Miro board, because we knew that they'd prefer to work on the flip chart. And my on-site co-facilitator, she was constantly using an app that helped you to import super quickly all the post-its that we found on-site into the online environment. Because at the
Wow.
end, we needed to think about a solution on how to import the sticky notes without me typing everything down or her typing everything down
Nice.
immediately. And you see there are a lot of tools already who support us also in those choices, right?
It's wonderful. And we also see platforms, these virtual training platforms, and that also support live mixed learning are getting better and better, as they should. But even just this week, I was part of a program, attended a program where my colleague allowed participants to choose their breakouts using the platform that they used was Microsoft Teams, but they preset up the meetings and then they had links to each of the 4 breakouts with different, topics for each. And learner chooses by clicking the link on the slide to go into the breakout, right? And then you come back to the main room and you can go to the next one, but you choose which one and you choose when you go in terms of the sequence. We also see this in some other learning platforms, virtual learning platforms like InSpace, where in InSpace you can also choose to go into a certain breakout and you can choose to come out at a certain time. So we see this learner autonomy, right? Which is good for learning because you have more, again, vested interest when you are helping to make decisions and kind of being playing the role of being a co-creator of your learning.
I love that learner autonomy, which is so much, it has so much to do with learner flexibility. And what I always say, the future of work is choice, but also the future of learning is choice in this case. And Diana, you made that very clear through the several aspects that you walked us through before, during, and after a life mixed training, what to be considered. And again, I'm pulling in here Diana's new book, Next Level Virtual Training. I will be also sharing the Amazon link so that you can immediately check out this fantastic publication.
Mhm.
And don't forget to connect with Diana here on LinkedIn as well. And also check out her blog on howlesassociates.com. Diana, it was a tremendous pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your time. You know that backstage there is a virtual anti-alcoholic cocktail prepared. I'll join you there in a minute, okay?
Thank you, Barbara.
See you in a bit. Thank you very much, everybody, for participating and for sending us your questions already beforehand. We do know that not always the live sessions coincide with your calendar, so use the possibility, as some of you always do, regularly do, to send me your questions beforehand to make sure that we pick up on them. Next week, we will talk about how to rock the stage as a virtual presenter with Lorraine Lee. So don't miss this out. Virtual Space Hero LinkedIn Lives are happening every Thursday at 5:30 p.m. CET. And you can already check out the lineup for the upcoming LinkedIn Live guests until June on our webpage, virtualspacehero.com. With that, I'm wishing you a beautiful morning, afternoon, or evening good night. And don't forget to become a virtual space hero. Bye bye.